A few months ago, I made a video about a potential extension of London's Docklands Light Railway, or DLR, to Thamesmead. And in some recent pretty good news, it looks like the government has given this project the green light.
In that video, however, I did mention a few other potential extensions that have previously been considered for the DLR, that range from quite sensible, such as an extension of the Beckton branch to Dagenham Dock, to pretty out there, like one idea that could have seen the system go all the way to Charing Cross in the West End. I didn't ultimately go into too much detail about those extensions at the time, but I did say that, to quote myself, they could make for a pretty interesting standalone video. And, well, this is going to be that video. I'm going to be basing most of this video off of this map released by the Mayor of London's office back in the early 2010s, which features their then quite ambitious plans for the system.
Since it opened in the late 1980s, the DLR has already been extended a number of times. In fact, I'd say from the 80s to the 2010s, it was easily the fastest growing transport system in London. Originally, it just consisted of two routes, the first of which ran from Island Gardens to the major rail interchange at Stratford, while the second also ran from Island Gardens, but this route would instead give it a link to the city proper at Tower Gateway. While the Tower Gateway stop was useful, it was also somewhat inconvenient, not directly connecting with any other transport line. So it wasn't long after that, in 1991, that a small branch to Bank was added for a much better interchange with the tube network. Next, in 1994, the system would be extended westward to Beckton, followed by a southwards extension in 1999 that saw it cross under the river to reach Lewisham, and then an eastwards extension just past London City Airport in 2005. That same extension would then cross under the Thames to reach Woolwich Arsenal in 2009, which was then followed by the most recent extension of the system to Stratford International in 2011.
This basically brings us to where the system is today, but as I mentioned at the start of the video, there have been some other ideas for extensions that could have seen it look very different. So let's start with one of the more ambitious ones that could have seen the system extended into the West End. These plans were floated in the 2000s and 2010s as a way to relieve pressure on the very busy underground lines running through central London, as well as Bank Station.
The general idea would have seen the line extended beyond Bank to City Thameslink, after which the line would split into a northern branch that would head to Holborn, followed by Euston, and finally King's Cross and Pancras. After City Thameslink, there would also have been a southern branch, which would have headed to Charing Cross, followed by Green Park, and then Victoria. This would obviously have been a very big change for the DLR, and would have taken it from effectively just being a useful but ultimately, by London scale, small metro system that basically just serves East London, to a large-scale rapid transit system almost on par with a tube. Instead of just taking people to the edge of central London and requiring them to transfer to other services like it does currently, these plans envisioned the DLR forming a core part of how people move around central, and in doing so it would have brought a number of benefits.
The most obvious would be better connectivity. Within central London, these plans would open up a bunch of new direct links, like from Euston to Holborn or from Victoria to City Thameslink, which would reduce the number of changes people need to make when travelling between these destinations. But the biggest winners connectivity-wise would be people travelling from East London to Central or vice versa. For example, commuters arriving from Euston, Victoria, King's Cross or St Pancras stations currently need to change trains twice to reach their offices in Canary Wharf. With these plans though, this would have been simplified to just once.
Similarly, someone living in, say, Island Gardens but having an evening out in Covent Garden would have needed to take the DLR to Bank and then changed, whereas under these plans this could have been done in a single-seat journey. This in turn brings me to the other benefit of these plans, which would be capacity. Obviously, by opening up these new routes through central London, they would give people a new alternative to the underground, and thus help reduce overcrowding along these central sections of various tube lines. It would also have helped ease overcrowding at Bank, as, with it being the DLR's current terminus, each train that arrives there brings potentially hundreds of people into that station, many of whom then need to move through it to change for other underground lines that are often also quite busy themselves. Whereas this extension would have spread out those crowds to other stations like Charing Cross or Holborn. With that said though, a lot of the capacity benefits in central London would end up being provided by the Elizabeth line instead, which also, with its stops at places like Canary Wharf, Custom House and Woolwich, did a good job boosting connectivity to many of the areas currently served by the DLR. The fact that the Elizabeth line was already being planned when these extensions were being floated And given how expensive building any sort of underground rail infrastructure in central London can be, these DLR plans fell onto the back burner and haven't really been revived since.
Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm in deep research mode, like when I'm going through decades-old TfL planning documents and trying to figure out where the DLR might have gone, I often tend to lose track of time, which is why Huel Black Edition has become a bit of a lifesaver for me. It's a complete meal that takes just about 30 seconds to make, and each serving is packed with 40 grams of protein, 26 vitamins and minerals, and absolutely no artificial sweeteners.
It's also gluten-free, low in sugar, and because it's entirely plant-based, it's great for the planet too. One bag gives you up to 17 meals, so there's barely any packaging waste. Personally, I found myself really liking the coffee caramel flavour. It obviously tastes great, but also helps keep me going as it's packed with vitamin B12 to reduce tiredness and fatigue.
Plus, with prices starting from just £1.79 a meal, it's actually quite affordable. So if you want to get your Huel, head to my.huel.com/moose. I'll put that link in the description, or you can access it with this QR code and use the code MOOSE to get £10 off your first order on orders over £60. On top of that, every customer receives a free Huel shaker with their first order. So thanks again to Huel for sponsoring this video, but now let's get back to those weird and wonderful DLR plans.
The next extensions I want to talk about have a similar story to the previous one, where the routes they would serve are potentially already going to be served by another of TfL's projects, although in this case one that has yet to start. Looking back at this map, and we can see that there were, at one point, plans to extend the DLR further south, from Lewisham to Catford, likely following an existing rail alignment. Details on this extension are quite scarce, but it is suggested there would have at least been 2 intermediate stops, which would likely have been at the existing Ladywell station, and then a completely new stop near Medusa Road. There was even potential for the line to branch off the existing rail alignment and head to Forest Hill. Given how built up the land between these stations is, I have to imagine this would have been via a tunnel.
Another plan for the DLR south of Lewisham that wasn't included in that map, but I think it's worth talking about anyway, would have seen the DLR take over the small branch line to Bromley North. This approximately 3-kilometre line has just 3 stations, at Bromley North, Sandridge Park and then Grove Park, where people making onward journeys need to change for national rail services.
If incorporated into the DLR, however, this would have changed, and trains would have been able to continue up to Lewisham, and of course beyond, via Hither Green. In the case of both of these southern extensions though, much of these areas are already planned to be served by the Bakerloo line extension, which would see that tube line extended to Lewisham and then potentially beyond to Beckenham and Hayes.
The Bakerloo line extension is currently one of TfL's major priorities, as evidenced by the recently launched Bakerloo bus service, albeit one they don't have funding for yet. Regardless, when funding does become available, the Bakerloo extension is definitely TfL's preference for improving rail transport in this part of London, and hence this DLR extension will likely not see the light of day.
The final extension shown on that map was probably one of the more realistic ideas, and probably got the closest to actually being built. It would have seen a new branch added to the Beckton branch of the DLR that would have headed eastwards to new stops at Beckton Riverside, Creekmouth, Barking Riverside and Goresbrook, before reaching the existing National Rail station at Dagenham Dock. The idea was for this new DLR line to support the redevelopment of this area, which was at the time, and many parts of it still are, very industrial.
The line was intended to cost around £750 million and was featured heavily in planning documents in the 2000s, but with the global financial crisis hitting in 2008, further development on the line was cancelled. Without this DLR line though, or any sort of significant transport improvement, the redevelopment of this area was held back. As a result, some sort of railway would eventually be needed, but it didn't come in the form of the DLR. Instead, it was the 2022 extension of the Suffragette Overground line that would provide the area with the transport it needed to allow the development to proceed.
This overground extension cost about half as much as the DLR extension was estimated to, at a bit over £300 million, but only added a single stop, where the DLR extension would have added about 5. This has meant that, while the overground extension was able to support the development in the Barking Riverside area, a lot of the areas around it still need improved transit access. This will likely be coming eventually as part of the DLR extension to Thamesmead that I mentioned at the start of this video, which is the only DLR extension TfL is currently actively pursuing, and would see 2 new stops added to the line at Beckton Riverside and then Thamesmead. But, as I've said, I've covered that extension a lot more thoroughly in another video. I'll put a link on screen if you want to check it out.
Ultimately though, I think it's been interesting to look at this collection of sometimes weird and wonderful plans for the DLR. They really get you thinking about what the system could have been, and honestly even could still be. It's clear the system still has a lot of room to grow, and while most of the plans I've mentioned in this video will likely never become a reality, at the very least, all of their purposes have been sort of filled by other transit plans, whether that's the Elizabeth line, the Bakerloo line extension, or even other DLR extensions, like the one to Thamesmead.
With that said though, I would be interested in hearing from you all if you think any of these plans should be brought back. Personally, I'm kind of partial to that Bromley North extension. It would breathe some life into that small branch line, and I think it could complement the Bakerloo line extension if done properly. But that's just my opinion. Feel free to leave yours in the comments. And while you're at it, if you enjoyed the video, you could consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. If you really liked the video, you could even support the channel on Ko-fi. I do always appreciate it. But as always, I'm Kyle, aka City Moose, and thanks for watching.